11:45 at night. The kitchen island was cold marble. I knew the temperature of the stone because I had hand-selected the slab myself 5 years ago. My mother Susan didn't appreciate the craftsmanship. She just appreciated the leverage. She took a sip of my vintage Cabernet, then slid a single document across the polished stone. It was a quitclaim deed. "You have 2 weeks to vacate, Olivia," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "We are gifting the property to Brandon. He needs the equity for a business loan." It wasn't a request. It was a demolition order on my life, signed with a smile. Drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever poured your heart into something only for someone else to try and take the credit? I want to know. I'm not alone in this. I didn't scream. I didn't reach for the wine bottle to smash it against the counter, though the physics of the impact played out in my mind with perfect clarity. Instead, a familiar sensation settled over me. It was the cold, focused calm of a site inspection. It was the same detachment I used when I walked into a derelict building and had to decide what could be saved and what had to be demolished. My mother blinked, her smile faltering just a fraction. She was waiting for the tears. She was waiting for the daughter who used to beg for her approval, the one who would bargain and plead. But that daughter wasn't in the room anymore. The architect was. I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. "I need to verify the structural integrity before I sign off on any transfer," I said. My voice was flat, monotone. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of procedure. I walked past them, ignoring Brandon's triumphant smirk, and moved into the foyer. My hand ran along the original oak banister I had stripped, sanded, and refinished by hand over the course of 3 agonizing weekends. The grain of the wood vibrated against my palm, holding the history living inside it and the money I had bled into it. Brendan followed me, swirling his wine glass, already acting like the lord of the manor. "It's a nice place, Olivia," he said, his voice thick with unearned confidence. "I'll probably knock out that wall in the dining room, though. Open it up, make it modern." I stopped. I looked at the load-bearing wall he was pointing to. If he touched that wall without understanding the trust system I had installed in the ceiling, the second floor would collapse into the first. Correcting him would have been a kindness he couldn't afford. Warning him would have been a breach of my own strategy. I simply nodded, cataloging his ignorance. He saw a house. He saw an asset he could leverage for quick cash. He didn't see the bones. I continued my silent tour. I checked the utility panel in the hallway. I inspected the smart home hub I had hardwired into the plaster. To them, it looked like I was saying a sentimental goodbye. It looked like grief, but inside my head, I was running a frantic inventory. I was calculating the square footage, the property lines, and the easements. I was mentally pulling up the blueprints I had drawn 5 years ago. I remembered exactly where the property line ended and where the deception began. My mother called out from the kitchen, her voice sharp with impatience. "Olivia, stop pacing. You're making this difficult. Just accept that we're doing what's best for the family." I turned back to look at them one last time. They were framed perfectly by the archway I had restored. They looked like intruders in a museum. I wasn't difficult. I was thorough, and they had made a critical error in their calculations. They thought they were evicting a tenant. They didn't realize they were declaring war on the builder. "I'll be ready to vacate by the deadline," I said. I picked up my leather portfolio from the console table, the only thing in that house that contained the actual truth of ownership, and walked to the front door. I didn't slam it. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a dramatic exit. I closed the heavy oak door with a soft, solid click. It sounded exactly like the lock of a bank vault engaging. I walked out into the cool Chicago night, not defeated, but calculating. The demolition hadn't started yet. I was just gathering my tools. I drove 3 blocks to the commercial district, pulling into the alley behind the row of historic buildings. My key fob clicked, and the heavy roll-up door of the warehouse rattled open. This was my sanctuary, my studio, my actual home. I parked the car and sat in the silence for a moment, letting the adrenaline fade into a dull, throbbing ache behind my eyes. I closed them, and immediately I was back in the brownstone 5 years ago. It hadn't been a multi-million-dollar asset then. It had been a corpse. The air had smelled of wet rot and abandonment. Black mold bloomed across the plaster like a cancer. And the roof had leaked for so long that the structural beams were spongy to the touch. My parents had bought it as a distressed property, a fixer-upper that they had no intention of fixing themselves. They didn't have the vision, and they certainly didn't have the capital. But I did. The memory of the sledgehammer's weight in my hands returned. I remembered the grit of drywall dust coating my tongue, the chemical burn of paint stripper in my nose, and the way my knees screamed after 12 hours of laying tile. I had poured $150,000 of my own savings into that building. Every paycheck, every bonus, every spare dime went into copper piping, high-efficiency insulation, and custom cabinetry. I didn't just renovate it, I resurrected it. Why did I do it? Why did I pour my life's blood into a property where my name was only a whisper on the title? That was the variable I had finally solved. It wasn't generosity. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to balance the ledger. For my entire life, my relationship with my mother had been purely transactional. Love wasn't a birthright. It was a salary I had to earn. If I was useful enough, if I was successful enough, if I built them a palace they could brag about to their friends, then maybe, just maybe, I would finally be solvent in their eyes. I was the frog in the pot, and the water had been heating up for 32 years. I had normalized the extraction. I accepted that my role was to give and Brandon's role was to take. While I was rewiring the electrical system to code, Brandon was wiring money to offshore sports books. While I was sourcing period-correct hardware, he was sourcing new ways to disappoint them, which they inevitably forgave. I thought I was buying equity in the family. I thought I was proving that I was the indispensable asset. I looked around my dark studio, surrounded by drafting tables and material samples. The silence here was different. It wasn't the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a fortress. I realized now that my usefulness hadn't bought me love. It had just increased my market value. To Susan and Brandon, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was a contractor. They hadn't bothered to pay. I was a developer who had foolishly worked without a contract. I turned on the desk lamp, the harsh light flooding my blueprints. They thought they had extracted all the value I had to offer. They thought the renovation was complete. But they had forgotten the first rule of architecture. Never build on a foundation you haven't inspected yourself. I pulled a flat, wide file from the bottom drawer. It was dusty, but the label was crisp and clear. It contained the one thing that proved my sweat equity wasn't a gift. It was a lien, and I was about to call it in. 3 days later, the invasion began in earnest. I sat at the kitchen island nursing a black coffee, watching Brandon dismantle my life with a tape measure. He wasn't just measuring space, he was measuring his ego against the dimensions of my living room. He snapped the metal tape against the custom wainscoting I had installed, leaving a small dent. I didn't flinch. The cost of repair was simply added to the mental invoice I was compiling. He wasn't alone. Kelsey, his wife, stood in the archway, looking like she wanted to disappear into the floorboards. She was 7 months pregnant. her hands resting protectively on her stomach. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the high-end finishes, the restored crown molding, and the obvious fact that someone me was still living here. She knew this was wrong. The apology was stuck in her throat, choking her. Brandon ignored her discomfort. He was too busy redesigning a house he didn't legally own yet. "I'm thinking this wall comes down," he announced, gesturing to the partition between the dining room and the solarium. "Open concept. Make it flow better for the parties." I set my coffee cup down with a deliberate clink. "That's a load-bearing sheer wall, Brandon," I said, my voice helpful, almost pleasant. "If you remove it, the roof load transfers to the floor joists, which aren't rated for that weight. You'll have the master bathtub in the dining room within a week," he scoffed, but he lowered the tape measure. "You worry too much, Olivia. That's why you never take risks. That's why you're still single." "I'm an entrepreneur. I see the big picture." I smiled. It was a razor-thin expression. "You're right," I said. "I get bogged down in the details, like permits and engineering reports and title deeds. Speaking of which, did the appraiser come by yet?" "Oh yeah," he said, puffing out his chest. The bank valued it at $1.8 million. They were impressed, said it was the most valuable footprint on the block. I nodded slowly. $1.8 million. That figure confirmed everything. To get that valuation, the appraiser had to have included the square footage of the attached warehouse structure and the air rights above it. If they had only appraised the residential shell, it would have been worth half that. Brandon hadn't just lied to me, he had lied to the bank. He had claimed 100% ownership of a footprint he only owned 60% of. My attention shifted to Kelsey. She was looking at a framed photo on the mantel, a picture of me, covered in drywall dust, smiling on the day I finished the restoration. "You can take that down," I told her gently. She jumped, her face flushing crimson. "Olivia, I don't know what to say. Susan told us you wanted to move. She said you were downsizing to the studio." I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't a villain. She was collateral damage. She was nesting in a tree that was about to be felled. "It's complicated, Kelsey," I said. "But you should know something about this house. The foundation is tricky. If you don't know where the support beams are, the whole thing can come down around your ears." She looked at me, confusion wearing with fear in her eyes. I wasn't talking about architecture anymore. I was giving her a warning shot. Brandon interrupted, slapping the wall jovially. "Don't listen to her, babe. She's just jealous. We secured the loan. The money hits the account on Friday. Once we pay off the investors, we are set for life." Investors. That was a polite word for bookies. I stood up, rinsing my mug in the sink. I was done here. I had the confirmation I needed. He had formally applied for the loan using fraudulent collateral. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for him to walk into it. I walked past them toward the back door, pausing only to tap the wall Brandon wanted to demolish. "Make sure you use a licensed contractor," I said. "You wouldn't want to build your future on a mistake." I left them standing in the sun-drenched living room, bathed in the light I had designed, totally unaware that they were standing in the middle of a crime scene. Friday morning arrived with the sterile precision of a scheduled execution. Susan had orchestrated everything perfectly. At 10 in the morning, sharp, the doorbell rang. She was seated at the head of the dining table, flanked by their family lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, and a loan officer from the bank, a man named Mr. Peterson, who looked eager to close the deal. Brandon was pacing, vibrating with a mix of arrogance and desperation. Kelsey sat in the corner looking like she was attending a funeral. I walked into the room carrying nothing but a slim black portfolio. Susan smiled, a triumphant expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're right on time, Olivia," she said. "Mr. Peterson needs the final signatures on the deed transfer so we can process the equity loan for Brandon. It's all very standard. Just sign where indicated and you can be on your way." She pushed a heavy, cream-colored document toward the empty chair at the foot of the table. I didn't sit. I stood behind the chair, my hands resting on the backrest. I looked at Mr. Peterson. "Before anyone signs anything," I said, my voice calm and professional, "I need to clarify the collateral you are accepting for this loan. Are you underwriting the residential structure only or the entire property footprint?" Mr. Peterson looked confused. "The entire property, of course. The appraisal came in at $1.8 million. That valuation includes the primary residence and the attached commercial warehouse structure in the rear. It's a unique mixed-use lot, very valuable." I nodded. That's what I thought. I opened my portfolio and slid a single notarized document across the table. It wasn't a quitclaim deed. It was a property survey from 5 years ago, attached to a separate title deed. "Then you have a problem, Mr. Peterson, because the residential structure you are sitting in doesn't own the warehouse. I do." The room went silent. Brandon stopped pacing. Susan's smile froze. "What are you talking about?" Brandon snapped. "It's one lot. It's always been one lot." "Not since 5 years ago," I corrected him. "When I started the restoration, Grandmother Catherine knew about your financial habits, Brandon, and she knew about Mom's obsession with appearances. She didn't trust you with the asset, so before she signed the house over to Mom and Dad, she legally subdivided the air rights and the commercial warehouse structure. She sold them to me for $10. I pointed to the document. "I own the warehouse. I own the air rights above the second floor. And most importantly, the main sewer line, the electrical main, and the fire egress for this building all run through my commercial property. Without an easement, which I have not granted, this house is legally uninhabitable. It has no utilities. It has no fire exit. It is, for all intents and purposes, a very expensive storage unit." Mr. Peterson snatched the document, his eyes scanning the legal description. His face went pale. This changes the valuation significantly. If the residential unit is landlocked from utilities, it's essentially worthless as collateral." He looked up at Brandon, his expression hardening. "You listed the entire footprint on your loan application. You claimed 100% unencumbered ownership." Brandon was sweating now. "It's a technicality. We're family. She'll sign the easement." "I won't," I said. I looked directly at Susan. "You wanted me to leave. You wanted me to vacate my home so you could give it to Brandon. I'm happy to leave, but I'm taking my property with me, and that includes the utilities and the legal right to occupy this building." Mr. Peterson stood up, closing his laptop with a snap. "Mr. Mitchell, submitting a loan application with known title defects is bank fraud. We cannot proceed with this financing. In fact, I'll be flagging your file with our risk department. Do not contact us again." He walked out without another word. The slam of the front door echoed like a gunshot. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. It was the sound of an illusion shattering. Susan stared at the table, her mind unable to process the reality. She had spent her life believing that her status as mother gave her absolute authority. She believed she could simply rewrite reality because she said so. But the law didn't care about her feelings. The law didn't care about her status. The law only cared about the deed, and the deed was mine. Brandon slumped into the chair Mr. Peterson had vacated, the blood draining from his face until he looked like a ghost. He wasn't mourning the loss of the house. He was doing the math on what happened when he didn't pay the people he owed by Friday. The loan was gone, his leverage was gone, and the investors he had borrowed from didn't care about architectural details. They only cared about cash. Susan was the first to break the silence. She didn't scream this time. She dissolved. She looked at me, her eyes wet and wide, switching tactics instantly from tyrant to martyr. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "He is your brother. We are your family. You would destroy us over air rights?" I walked to the heavy steel door that connected the dining room to the back warehouse, my studio. I pulled a set of keys from my pocket. "I didn't destroy anything," I said calmly. "I just refused to let you use my foundation to prop up your lies." I inserted the key into the deadbolt. "I'm locking this door. You have 24 hours to remove your personal effects. If you are still on the premises after that, I will file for a partition sale to liquidate the asset. You can buy me out, or we sell it to a stranger, but I am done subsidizing your delusions." I turned the key, the lock engaged with a heavy, final th. It was the sound of a severance package. I walked out through my studio, leaving them trapped in a beautiful, useless shell of a house, surrounded by expensive furniture they couldn't afford, in a room that was slowly running out of air. 6 months later, the dust had finally settled. The partition sale went through faster than I expected. My parents couldn't afford to buy out my equity, especially not with Brandon's debts crashing down on them. They were forced to sell the residential shell to a developer who had the capital to negotiate an easement with me. They walked away with a fraction of what they expected, most of which went immediately to paying off Brandon's investors to keep him out of the hospital. They downsized to a rented condo in the suburbs, far away from the social circles they had tried so hard to impress. I took my share of the sale, the equity I had earned, with my own hands. And I didn't buy a new house. I poured it right back into the warehouse. I stripped the industrial space down to the brick and built something new. I stood on the mezzanine level of the newly christened Catherine Design Incubator, named after the grandmother who had seen the truth before anyone else. Below me, the space was humming with life. It wasn't just a studio anymore. It was a co-working space and housing program for single mothers in creative fields, women who had the talent but lacked the foundation. Kelsey walked up the stairs, holding a stack of fabric swatches. She looked different now. The fear was gone, replaced by a tired but genuine peace. She had left Brandon the day the loan fell through, choosing uncertainty over fraud. Now she was my office manager, and her baby slept soundly in the nursery we had built in the corner office. "The new tenants are asking about the lighting specs for the gallery wall," she said, smiling. "Tell them they can design it however they want," I replied, "as long as the wiring is up to code." I looked out over the space. My parents had spent their lives trying to build a legacy of status, a facade of wealth, to hide the rod inside. They wanted a monument to themselves. I realized then that the best revenge wasn't watching them fail, though that was satisfying. The true revenge was taking the bricks they had thrown at me and using them to build a shelter for someone else. They wanted to hoard power. I chose to distribute it. I had built a fortress to protect myself, but I had turned it into a lighthouse. They were gone, fading into the background of a story they thought they were writing. But I was still here, and I was just breaking ground. If you believe that family is defined by how they treat you, not just by blood, share this story and tell me in the comments, what's the one thing you've built that you will never let anyone take away?